This is where some small business advocate groups have talked about this a little bit more because those penalties are pretty high. Hey, this is KB. I'm a technologist, thought leader, and self-published author. I've been publishing ebooks, print books, audio, video, and other content online since 2015. I stumbled quite a bit, tried many different types of content, marketing strategies, software tools, and social media streams. Now I'm here to help you learn from my mistakes and find inspiration along the way. We'll take a journey together to leverage your content, dive into practical tips, and test out actionable strategies that move you from posts to profit. This is the Self-Pub Empire Podcast. Hi there, and welcome back to the Self-Pub Empire Podcast. This is your host, KB. I have an interesting topic for you today that I think applies for many, many people. It is really something that I'm shocked isn't being talked about that much in the news media and other outlets. This is about beneficial ownership information, and I really don't understand why people aren't actually talking about this that much. It's very, very limited. If you're an online creator, I have personally encouraged you to incorporate a business for the tax benefits. So go back to episode 2, and you can listen to that episode to talk about the benefits of incorporating your business, allowing you to take care of those things and move those things forward does require some overhead because the government has regulations and filings and things like that, usually monetarily minimum, but you do have to pay attention to it. So therefore, there's benefits, but of course, there's always some paperwork and things that you have to do. Beneficial ownership information is relatively new. It's been enacted. It's called BOI. It's really just affecting small businesses. So if you're a solopreneur or online creator with your business, any kind of business, LLC, etc., you have to file. And this is coming from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. And I, again, don't understand why anyone isn't talking about this. So we're going to dive into this today and talk through this. It's not too difficult, but I want people to be aware of it. So I want this to be sent out. I want people to listen. I want you to listen to me through this, and I will help you through it to the best of my ability. I don't think it's that hard, but let's dive in. So what is this thing? The FinCEN.gov, we'll link that in the show notes. The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network is a bureau of the U.S. Department of Treasury. This department receives and maintains financial transactions of data to combat terrorism and money laundering. I know that if you're at all the age that I am, you are probably familiar with the Patriot Act from the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and that was really where transactions are being tracked at a certain monetary level. Businesses, of course, are regulated by the government in various shapes and sizes, and state and federal. So back in 2021, so not that long ago, Congress enacted this bipartisan Corporate Transparency Act to curb illicit financial activities. It's really about who ultimately owns or controls companies that are doing business in the United States. So who is the beneficial owner of said company? The filing is really only intended to be completed once, unless there's an update or correction that would be needed in who owns the company and what their financial aspects are, financial beneficial ownership actually is. To quote their website, which actually is pretty well put together, many companies are required to report information to FinCEN about the individuals who ultimately own or control them. FinCEN began accepting reports on January 1st, 2024. It also talks about how scammers are already jumping into this. So if you look at the website, you're going to see things about being aware that scammers are out there doing things. Alert, it says, FinCEN has been notified of recent fraudulent attempts to solicit information from individuals and entities who may be subject to reporting requirements under the Corporate Transparency Act. The fraudulent correspondence may be titled Important Compliance Notice, in quotes, and ask the recipient to click on a URL or to scan a QR code. Those emails or letters are fraudulent. FinCEN does not send unsolicited requests. Please do not respond to these fraudulent messages or click on any links or scan any QR codes with them. So that's kind of standard safety etiquette online. But the interesting part is that since this isn't very well known, out there in the industry and not talked about that much in the major news outlets, I can understand how some folks could be scammed by this or not understand what's actually happening. So owners and applicants are definitions that the FinCEN uses, and owners do the controlling and applicants do the filing. But that can actually be both. So if you're a solopreneur, what you're going to end up doing is you're the applicant and the owner. And there's going to be some things that you're going to need. And so, technically you're going to be the financial beneficiary of any output from this company that you have, and you have to file. All right. So we kind of talked about the what and what the point of this is. And really, to add to that a little bit, the bottom line is that it is really a database of information about registering who gets benefits, like I said, from owning the company. And it really only needs to be done once, unless there's a change. And so that's really their whole point in what it is to do, what it is that they're doing. So I'm not exactly sure what is happening behind the scenes. I've done a little bit of research. My educated guess is that if there are some very large questionable transactions that are being done relative to a company, they can determine who that owner of that company is and potentially then see about this white collar crime of embezzlement or whatever it is that they're looking for, or terrorist activities or organized crime. They can look at this and draw some conclusions and potentially track those folks down and preferably bring them to justice. I certainly hope so. So who is actually supposed to do this? Here's what they say. A company, limited liability corporation, or United States company, or foreign company registered to do business in the United States. If your company was created or registered prior to January 1st, 2024, you will have until January 1st, 2025 to report your beneficial ownership information. If your company is created or registered in 2024, you must report that beneficial ownership information within 90 calendar days after receiving actual or public notice that your company's creation or registration is effective, whichever is earlier. Keep in mind, company registrations happen at the state level in the United States. So that's an important distinction. This is a federal entity, and the states are the ones that usually regulate directly the businesses in their state. So that's an important thing to remember. If your company is being created later on in 2025 and further on, you'll have 30 days to file after you create your entity at that point in time. And again, that's after things come back from the state and so on and so forth. So that's really that part. But who else is this really talking about? And are there exceptions? They have a whole website of small entity compliance guidelines. It's very extensive. It's about 57 pages. There's a lot of information about who actually has to register, but it's actually really simple. There's really two buckets of things that make sense about what it is that who has to file, who not. So like banks and credit unions, insurance and brokerages, larger companies, they're really not required to file. So more than 20 employees and more than $5 million in sales. Those entities do not have to file. And that's about 23 types of things. In general, anything that is either inactive or other laws that are governing it, like financial laws, things like that. So like I said, credit unions, banks, brokerages, insurance companies, those kinds of things are all usually registered in some financial way or another. Outside of this, they have other financial laws that basically regulate them, so they don't really have to file. So generally, that's the trick. So if you think about it, it's just about any kind of corporation that has less than 20 employees, possibly you by yourself or myself, and I don't have more than 5 million in sales either. So either way, it doesn't matter. You have to file. And so that's really what it boils down to. They're trying to capture anything that isn't already regulated through some other or registered. I don't know about regulation. Registered is the right word, and any other format. So that's who has to do this. And any solopreneur that's doing this, they're going to have to do this. Does this cover sole proprietorships? That doesn't seem to be the case, because those are being done through your own personal tax forms. So a sole proprietorship isn't very safe. There's a lot of things that can happen, and you're liable for a lot of things if you're doing business as a sole proprietor. But once you registered as some kind of a corporation, limited liability, S Corp, C Corp, whatever, then you need to file if you don't have that many employees or $5 million in sales. So pretty much just about everybody has a small business of just about any kind. All right, so that's the who. How does this actually work? Well, I have a lot of good news on this. Filing a report is an online process. It's free of charge. I have to admit, the website is very good. It's very step-by-step, very wizard-oriented, and it really doesn't take that long. But you have to make sure you have some information ready to go before you do this, or you're going to have to hit the pause button and go back and finish it out, or go back and file more later. You can't finish it out with some of these pieces of information. So here's what I'm going to let you know before you get started jumping in on this. What you really want to make sure you have is electronic copies of some form of identification for every applicant or the owner, and it could be both, to make sure that you have those that are uploadable, PDFs or JPEGs or PNG files. You need to have that. Scan that, make a photocopy of it, take a picture with your phone. Any of those things do work, but you have to make sure you've got a copy of some kind of personal identification with a picture ID. Personally, I use my passport, which I think works really great because it's a one image and I'm good. I don't have to do a front and a back. I can just open up the booklet, take the shot, works great, looks good, and it comes through really, really well. And it has all of my information on it. And usually a passport's a little bit higher in validity, I would say the word would be, than other forms of identification, because a passport is a federal government identification in the United States. So you want to make sure you've got a digital copy of that before you get started. The second thing you want to make sure is, do you have your social security number on you? Of course, if that's what you're using. I had recommended before, if you're starting your own company, what you really want to do is you want to have a federal employee identification number. Then you don't have to use your social security number at all. You actually can use the EIN, the federal EIN, and that works really great because that's the identifier of your company itself. And so that gives you that extra layer of protection for your own social security number. You don't have to, and you don't have to have it, but I always recommend having a federal employee identification number. Okay, so you go to the website, fincen.gov. Make sure it's .gov. Don't go to some other site, .com or anything like that, because you're going to get scammed. It is online. It's free of charge. There is no cost. That's a benefit. And technically, you should only have to do it the once. So it is the BOI e-filing system. You can use paper. Personally, I do not recommend that. Paper PDFs are kind of a pain. It's the e-filing system. You go there in BOI reporting. You get started. And like I said, you can do the PDF version. I don't want to do it. I just always go with File Online BOIR. You can go there. And it says it's owned by the Department of Treasury. You want to do your initial report, or correct prior report, or update the prior report, or newly exempt entity. Oh, that reminds me, exempt entities do exist, such as nonprofit groups tend to not have to do this either. I think there's more details on that. You'll have to dig through the 57 pages to get that information, but nonprofits, generally speaking, don't do this. So that's another comment there. But nonprofits are regulated in a different way because they're not a taxable entity. Anyway, so going back to that, make sure you do initial report. If that's what you're going to do, you're going to have to enter the date of it, the notice. There's a bunch of Privacy Act information that you're going to want to potentially skim through. We're all used to a lot of these legalese terms that get thrown at us, and kind of hit the next button and move forward. Going to the next page, like I said, this is much more of like a wizard type interface. Make sure you're stating it's the first time. Since it is your first time, you're going to, in the process of doing this, request a FinCEN ID number. This is an interesting little twist on this. Because you're reporting your company, they're also going to assign another identification number to you. So you could have an EIN from the federal government for tax purposes, and you could also have a FinCEN ID. You don't have to apply for the FinCEN ID separately. You can do it right in the work itself, right in the wizard, which is exactly what I did. So you want to do your reporting company's legal name. You add that in. Make sure, like I said, you request your FinCEN ID in the process. And you can add alternate names too, like doing business as. That I think is very important because some companies do have multiple doing business as information because they're actually like restaurants and things like that will have that sometimes. So make sure if you have an alternate name that you're doing business as, make sure you put it in there so you don't run afoul of the regulation. You want to add in your employee identification number, your social security number, the country, your state that you're in, that the company is in, the tribal jurisdiction. You can do that as well. That's available as an option, and the address, of course. Moving to the next page. So I'm going through this relatively quickly. You want to make sure that on the next page, you're going to go through and do the company application. The company applicant, which is the filer. For myself and maybe you, the solo entrepreneur, you're going to be the same thing. You're going to be the company applicant. And of course, you're going to be the beneficial owner. So this is where you say that, hi, this is me, and I'm filing this for myself. It's your name, your address, what form of identification you're going to use. So you're going to actually say what it is, like state, driver's license, or passport was an option, and the issuing jurisdiction, if it's a state, and what kind of a thing it actually is, a license, and so on and so forth. There are some restrictions on what you can upload. So it's a 4 meg file or less for the image itself. That's JPEG or a PNG file or a PDF. So that works as well. And you can create those by scanning in whatever your identification number is and send that up. Per person, per applicant, or filer, you can only send up one file, document, JPEG picture per person. So anything, if you want to do the front and the back, there's not a lot of specific instructions on there, but if you're using a driver's license, my recommendation is to make a copy of the front and the back, put that all together, and then upload that. So once you're doing that as the applicant, then you go on to the next page, and that's where you end up with the beneficial owner information. It's really, really similar. And as a solo entrepreneur, you're probably going to end up doing exactly what I did, which is you enter all the same information again, and your license or your passport or whatever, your email info, your name, and then some compliance acceptance kinds of check boxes to make sure that you're understanding and certifying that you understand what this is. I honestly don't think that it's terrible if you make a mistake, because it does say you can always refile and correct any mistakes later. However, you want to pay attention to the penalties, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. If you don't file, or if there's a problem or something is messed up, I don't know. It's a little foggy on where that actually line is crossed. But once you're done, it's relatively instantaneous. There's a filing success message. You get a beneficial ownership information ID number, which is some really long number, some tracking information, etc. You should make sure you get a copy of that web page that's displayed. Make sure you get a copy of your ID for your purposes and store it with all of your information for your business and stay organized there. In a future podcast, I'm going to probably talk about how I stay organized, how I work, and talk about how I stay organized with the business information and doing those kinds of things, which saves you time in the long run. That's really important to try to stay organized, especially if you want to be really serious about this. So you get the filing success, you get your ID number with some tracking information, and really that's it. That's all you really get from this process. It doesn't take too long. I would say as long as you're prepared, shoot for a half hour and get it done. Should be a one-time thing, and it's over. Interestingly enough, the penalties are relatively steep for this, for noncompliance. So they talk about criminal penalties and $500 each day for violation when you're in violation for this. I would think if you're not filing, then that's really where you're going to end up in that violation, potentially, and potentially another fine up to $10,000. This is where some small business advocate groups have talked about this a little bit more, because those penalties are pretty high compared to the incomes of many of these small business owners that are out there. I'm going to guess that they're going to be a little bit flexible of that for the next year, because I've got a feeling it's just not really been put out there that much. So I think they're going to see some non-compliance, and mostly just because it's accidental. So either way, there's a little bit of advocates out there for small business saying this is a relatively draconian kind of sets of violations for penalties. So really there you have it. That's really the business beneficial ownership information filing process. There's really not much to it. I am very surprised that this requirement for small businesses has not had that much airplay anywhere. I can't understand why exactly. If you search for news articles on the Corporate Transparency Act or BOI information, you will not find a lot of major news outlets covering this, which shocks me. Financial related news outlets seem to be mentioning it, but it's really just not very prominent. So I encourage you to dig into this yourself a bit and file it for sure, especially if you have your company, because you're going to need to do this. Government regulations are really not to be ignored when you're working from going from posts to profits. So make sure you pay attention to those things and file for yourself. I certainly hope that this episode has helped you and that I see you next time right here on the Self-Pub Empire podcast. Hey, congratulations. You just listened to another episode of the Self-Pub Empire podcast. I really hope you found something inspiring, useful, and actionable for your own entrepreneurial and business aspirations. Let's keep connecting as solopreneurs, authors, and online creators of all kinds. For more information, how-tos, great tools, and show notes for the show, head over to selfpubempire.com/podcast. Until next time, let's continue moving from posts to profit.